Welcome to Talkin Maine with the Bowtie Boy. I'm Tom Saviello, and I have my special friend and special guest, Paul Bells. He came back. I didn't scare him away. Paul, this morning on the radio, I talked about you coming on the show and just being this wealth of knowledge.
Sure.
And I told the story about my Hoosier, that I brought in, and I found the postcard.
Oh, yes.
And I showed it to you, and you right away knew who the family was and said it was Jan Maxim, and it was her grandparents.
Right.
And ultimately, we offered the Hoosier to them, and they didn't want it, but I gave them the original postcard so they could have it for their family collection.
The Percy Gould family.
Percy Gould. I couldn't remember this morning who it was.
Sure.
Yeah,
Owned the corn shop and the bean shop down there, one of the major employers, at least seasonally, during the canning and corn canning, bean corning business, like where McDonald's and other businesses are on the interval strip across from Hibbick Field. That was the Franklin Farms Products Company, and that worked like 24/7 for like about 3 months in the summer and the early fall each year. And the Gould family owned and operated that, from like the 30s up through until into the 60s.
Yeah, 60s. Your brother Peter worked there,
Oh, yeah. Rodney Porter and my brother worked together there. They were college kids who were doing what they needed to do. And Professor Frederick, UMF professor, retired, wrote a very detailed academically documented book on the corn and canning business in Maine. And he interviewed Rodney Porter, my brother, who had worked there when there was summers. And I think my brother said the biggest challenge of working there was sleep deprivation, because you'd have to go 24-hour shifts, 36-hour shifts. It was all night, all day, kind of operation. In those days, you didn't necessarily break it up, that type of thing.
Once the corn and beans came in fresh, you had to process them right away.
Right.
Because if you didn't process them, they'd go bad, or you'd lose whatever. So I could see why that was going on.
Yeah.
Wow, that was fascinating. We'll have to talk about that. Maybe
Sure.
I should bring Peter on.
Sure,
Make him do
sure,
a show with
sure,
me.
sure.
So
Right.
we're going to talk about Paul Revere. You told me something really interesting already. So
Let's get that.
this up on the screen.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's something most people will recognize.
Okay, this is naturally a familiar landmark here in Farmington. It's now called Merrill Hall. I think it was called the Administration Building at University of Maine. It's the nerve center of the University of Maine at Farmington. Now, before it was University of Maine at Farmington, it was the location of the administrative offices in the original classroom building, Farmington Academy, established about 1808 to 1812 in that era, gradually moved in.
Estate.
Yeah, it's on the site of that property here. They eventually moved that building away and built it in its place. But on that site, Paul Revere and his son, Joseph Revere, seized that property, at least half of it, where that building is now, from Farmington Academy. And so they were the owners of it under a sheriff's sale creditor's seizure in 1811. Now, how did that happen? That Paul Revere and Joseph Revere, one of his sons, owned it. Well, Paul Revere and Joseph Revere were in business, among other things. It was noted for the Revere Bells. And about 1808, a young man, perhaps a teenager, came to Boston and accepted delivery of a 400-pound bell from Paul Revere, and it was sold to the trustees of Farmington Academy for putting installation
in the bell tower.
Revere Bell in the Academy, original Academy building. And after lots of letters and correspondence and demands, the bill was about $211. In those days, some amount of money. Not being paid for it, Paul Revere and his son Joseph, by the way, he had 16 kids, so he perhaps needed the money. Yeah. 2 wives, 8 children by each wife, that's Paul Revere. And of course, it's an occasion for celebrating Patriots' Day, which we just went through a few days ago. But this is many years later, 1808, 1812 period. So there was a sheriff's sale in those days, and even today, to some extent, could happen if an institution or an individual owes money to a creditor. Then you can levy upon and seize that debtor's property. And that's what they did, a sheriff's sale. And so the property, half of the property of the Farmington Academy headquarters or administrative offices was sold at a sheriff's sale for about $211. And so Paul Revere owned it from the late summer of 1811. Meanwhile, Farmington Academy opened its doors to classes in January of 1812, not having yet paid it off, but apparently he didn't get an injunction to stop them from using the property, but he had title to it. And it wasn't until almost 6 months or so after they started classes, and almost a year after he had got the sheriff's sale, and about 4 years after he sold the Bell to Farmington Academy, that Farmington Academy redeemed the property. I think at that time there's like a 1-year equity of redemption so that you could buy it back. And they had to buy it back, including sheriff's costs and destination charges and dealer prep. It came to like $260 that he had to go buy the property back. And so Paul Revere and his son Joseph, the Revere Bell Company, were compensated at last. So when sometimes people go by this building, we are reminded of the fact that Paul Revere, maybe he did not spend time in Farmington, but he and his son did own part of property which is now one of the signature landmarks of at least our university, if not the community. There is no statue, no pillar to him. Now, what becomes of the Bell? Efforts were engaged in as beginning in the 1940s. A woman named Esther Forbes wrote a book called Paul Revere and His Gifts, and it was made the Book of the Month Club one time in like 1943, and it became a big selling book. In that book, this woman who wrote the book had uncovered the archives and some of the correspondence that Bell had conducted. And at that time, it became more known to contemporary observers that Revere had sold a Bell to Farmington Academy. And no one seems to be able to locate it. It might have been damaged, it might have been destroyed, might have gone on a junk heap. So it's been a mystery ever since it became more widely known, since even the 1940s, as to what became of the Bell. But this is not Paul Revere's only episode that he perhaps would have liked to have forgotten about the state of Maine. Because, you see, Paul Revere was almost court-martialed 4 years after he had a court-martial trial, believe it or not.
In Maine?
Arising out of alleged misconduct in Maine. Yes, absolutely. So, we go back 4 years after his midnight ride of 1775, because it was a year before the Declaration of Independence. By the way, he didn't say the British are coming, he said the regulars are coming. That's what he said. But anyway, and he was actually arrested and stopped partway through before other people could complete the journey. 4 years later, in 1779, he was a lieutenant colonel, fairly high-ranking officer under General Peleg Wadsworth, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's grandfather, and in connection with a naval campaign that the Massachusetts Navy, at that time each state had their own military, so the Massachusetts Navy went to Castine, because at that point they saw that the British were trying to establish a beachhead foothold in Castine because it was located not far from Bangor, not far from Canada. And so it would be a good point from which they could forestall American advancements and also a place for loyalists to take refuge. And so this fleet of Massachusetts ships, some of which were involved with Revere, made it there. And they had an opportunity to stop the small contingent of British who were already there, but they delayed in trying to give battle. And by the time they were about ready to strike an attack, a whole fleet of British Navy vessels showed up. And seeing the handwriting on the wall, some of them beat a retreat. And so Revere led a group of people, Revere, to his credit, claimed that he was trying to engage in exhortations to his superiors to carry out a battle plan before the British became too overwhelming. Supposedly that's what he said. But he was not listened to, and so he and some other troops that under his command retreated. and they retreated across the wilderness. They couldn't go back across the coast because the British were going to sink the ships. So they had to do kind of like what Benedict Arnold had sort of done in a different part of Maine a few years earlier, go through the wilderness. This wilderness was about a 60-mile journey between Castine and Augusta. And you go through such obscure places. Even now, it's a fairly wooded rural area.
Right.
Hibbett's Gore. Who's ever heard Hibbett's Gore? The town of Jackson, on the way to Augusta. Town of Washington, just a little obscure hamlets out of nowhere. And he made it, and some of the people died, and got to Augusta. When you get to Augusta, of course, you got the Kennebec River, and you can get yourself back to Boston a little bit easily. So he then was Wadsworth charged him with insubordination, charged him with not carrying out his duties, and that trial was delayed for about 2 or 3 years. They did come to trial, and he defended himself and eventually was exonerated, but he was kind of sidelined for the rest of the war.
Didn't they wasn't that called the Penobscot exhibition?
Yes, you've got it. That's right.
And they actually scuttled the ships, didn't they? Some of them.
I think that's right.
And
yes.
if I remember correctly, when I was up in Maine, up in Orrington, when we were living up there, they actually found some of those ships.
Oh.
I believe that is correct, or they found what they believed to be some of those ships scuttled in the base because when they went into the mud preserved them.
Oh.
It seems that I recall that, but I'll have to check that out.
Very, very interesting. Yes.
Yeah, so that fits with what you described. Yes.
Yeah, sure. So he spent a summer, part of a summer in Maine, in a way that some tourists would prefer not to do that. And so now the Revere was not well known, really, particularly. It was just an obscure footnote. There was nothing really celebrating his efforts to warn Lexington Concord about the British until Peleg Wadsworth, the general, wanted to court-martial him. His grandson, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, writes the poem about 1862 about the midnight ride of Paul Revere. So it's almost as if they're trying to atone for the family kind of effort against Revere, and that's how Revere became immortalized and so well known.
Oh, wow.
Now, one more thing is that there are Revere Bells in Maine. In the early 1970s, someone tried to take an inventory of them, and the one that's closest to the Farmington area is at the Beans Corner Baptist Church. It was originally in Dixfield.
Oh, yeah.
And then the early 1950s, it was transferred from Dixfield Church to a Beans Corner Baptist Church and is there today. So there's a few of them still in existence, but most of them that were sold in Maine no longer are able to be ascertained.
So, big question, did he really make George Washington's false teeth?
Well,
or is that another wives' tale?
he was a dentist.
Oh, okay.
And but one thing that I think has been perhaps authenticated is that Dr. Joseph Warren, who was killed at Battle of Bunker Hill,
right,
and that Revere did some forensic examination to determine Warren's identity through his teeth because he had examined him as a dentist before. But I have not heard particularly the one about he did some things with false teeth.
Yeah.
But he was a member. He was a civic-minded person. He was on the a leader in the Boston community for many years. Lived until about 1818. Many of the Revere Bells were actually manufactured after he died because his family carried on the business. And with all those children, 10 of the children died in childhood, but among them are people that are named for him. There was a Paul Revere who died a few years ago at the age of 85 in Massachusetts and used to celebrate his ancestors' achievements and carry out kind of a mock reenactment of things like that.
Yeah, because you're right. He actually got captured, but there were the others that took off after that got all the word out.
Yeah.
That the regulars or the British were coming.
Yeah.
Interesting guy.
Yeah.
So the other part of the story we were talking about today is my friend's grandfather, Albert Beliveau, Albert Beliveau, who was right up the road in Rumford, grew up there.
Yeah.
So that's a very interesting story.
Yeah, it's a new book. I'm in the process of trying to reviewing it. That's Albert Beliveau Sr. And he was born in 1887. That's in his World War I uniform. And he died in 1971. And the book is First Franco, Albert Beliveau, and Love, Politics, and Law, I should say, a biography by Douglas Rooks, who, of course, who's done 3 or 4 other books, including some on George Mitchell and the Democratic Party. So the story about that is that, well, there's one common strain, of course, with Paul Revere is that both have French origins. Revere is from Revere. It's an anglicized version of a French Huguenot name. So Paul Revere's ancestors came from France. Then they fled France at the time what the Edict of Nantes was revoked by Louis XIV and like around 1598 went to England. So anyway, Revere is a French name. Beliveau, but Paul Revere was a French Protestant. And then Albert Beliveau, he is the son of French immigrants who came from Canada. He was born in Lewiston in a family of some poverty. His father was in the baking business, and then he spent time and grew up in Lewiston and Chisholm. And then eventually, as he was a later teenager, migrated to Rumford with the family and experienced considerable challenges and went to Red Law in a law office, the McCarthy Law Office in Rumford, and then became a county attorney, and then, but of course, Albert Beliveau Sr.'s, his son Severin Beliveau is well known. He was in the state senate and the legislature, himself a county attorney and one of the more influential lobbyists in Augusta. Maine Times a few years ago used to rate the top 10 most influential people in Maine. That's Severin Beliveau. But of course, Emmett Beliveau, Severin's son, this Albert's grandson, became chief of staff of the chief of staff daily in the Obama White House, and is in Texas now, but still is an organizing of events. In fact, was called upon to help organize the inauguration of Joseph Biden a few months ago. So anyway, it's an illustrious progenitor of a family. And the book describes not only professional challenges, but personal challenges like the death of a daughter in childbirth when she was only like 27 years old. That's Judy, who was a popular language arts teacher at Stevens High School in 1967. A lot of people here locally will remember Darby, who's still alive but retired, an attorney in Rumford. And
that's Severin's brother.
That's correct. They were in practice together in Rumford originally with Mike Gentile, of course, not too far back too. And the Beliveau family has always had a summer place in Mooselook, McGundick, or Rangeley Lakes, depending on which time period you're looking at. And so the story recounts, of course, challenges of discrimination,
right,
and how the hierarchy of the state in some ways made them a victim of issues, and that Franco-Americans were not advancing and were oftentimes passed over for certain appointments. It tells a story about how he was passed over for Chief Justice of the Maine Supreme Court when he was on the court. He was the first Franco-American full-time judge in Maine in the 30s and the first Franco-American on the Maine Supreme Court beginning in 54.
Paul, there were 2 parts of discrimination here. One was Franco-American, the other was Catholic. Correct?
Yes,
there was a lot of fear that, go back even to John Kennedy, that we didn't have a Catholic president until John Kennedy was elected, because there was all this fear that the Pope would run the country. So that was part of the, at least that's
and some of it was ethnic discrimination. I think in the case of Kennedy, Maine was one of the most ardently Republican states voting for Nixon in 1960 against John F. Kennedy. And but 4 years later, we were one of the 5 top states for Lyndon Johnson against Goldwater. So we went from one extreme to the other in 2 elections. But I've always felt that to the extent that, of course, there was antipathy toward Catholicism in many parts of the country, that in the case of John F. Kennedy, one of the reasons why Maine was ardently for Nixon and against him, I don't think was necessarily as much because he might have been Catholic, but frankly, because a lot of people didn't like the fact he was from Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah. Well, that makes sense. I understand.
You have a lot of anti-Massachusetts feeling that exists today, regardless of whether you're Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, or anything else. If you're from Massachusetts, and so he was from Massachusetts, And I think that didn't help John Kerry either. When he was running for president, he was from Massachusetts, and people in northern England sometimes don't necessarily have that much of affinity, even though that's, of course, many of the forebears, the antecedents of established people in Maine came from Massachusetts. In fact, of course, we were part of Massachusetts at one time. So
there's a great book called The Lobster Coast. It was Colin Woodward worked at. It's a couple of years old. I don't know if you read that one or not, but it really talks about the migration of different people to Maine.
Yeah.
Like they left Massachusetts to come to Maine, and then they tried to grow the same crops that they grew in Massachusetts, which they couldn't because it was too cold. And then so they abandoned their farms. Then there's a Scottish piece came to Maine. That's why we have the stubborn streak in us, because of the Scots. And all the farms that they left because they couldn't farm, and I'm paraphrasing a lot out of Colin's book, all because they couldn't farm, those are the ones that got abandoned or being bought up by the out-of-staters to come live on a farm.
yeah.
So it's an interesting thing, but yes.
So there was a compensation, of course, for the prejudice that occurred earlier in the discrimination, in that after he'd retired, by that time Severin Beliveau had become himself chair of the Democratic State Committee and president of the National Association of State Chairs. And in that kind of situation, Severin Beliveu's office in Washington, D.C. was bugged by the Watergate burglars.
Right, exactly.
But a little bit before that, but while Severin was in his early years as chair of the state committee, he introduced his father, the retired Justice Beliveau, to Governor Curtis. And Governor Curtis was having to make up his mind who to appoint to the Maine Supreme Court Chief Justiceship. Well, Beliveau had been retired, not eligible, but Beliveau made a strong case with Curtis that it should be Armand Dufresne, Franco-American from Lewiston, rather than Donald Weber from Auburn, even though Weber had a little bit more seniority, but Dufresne was nominated, and it was contested by the Republican Executive Council, very divided council, but eventually Dufresne was confirmed as the first Franco-American Chief Justice, and that was to succeed Robert Williamson, who had in turn gotten the nod over Beliveau in 1956 earlier. So he played a role in trying to achieve that. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I think we skipped over it, but he was being considered to be the Chief Justice for a while earlier in his career when he was on the
That's right, because of when Muskie had the appointment open to him, and he felt quite aggrieved and slighted by that because he felt it was an instrument of anti-Franco-American discrimination. Yeah.
So, I mean, reading what you sent me, he seemed like a very fascinating guy. Of course, I do know Severin pretty well. The godfather of the Democratic Party, still is. Yeah. Probably not as influential as he used to be, but he still has an open door, I'm sure, and to come visit the present governor today, because she's just Severin. That's the way I treat him. He always treated me right.
Well, he could have written the Dale Carnegie book, How to Influence Friends and People, or whatever, that he has great capacity for persuasion, and has had entree with leaders of both parties, because he's sort of a middle-of-the-road Democrat, and he also had some influence, maybe partly because of the Franco-American connection with the Governor LePage administration, and that kind of thing. And the Brooks book too also points up divisions within the Franco-American community. It's intriguing that they have the Acadians, particularly in the Valley, and then those were people who were driven out of particularly New Brunswick and Nova Scotia at the end of the 7 Years' War, or sometimes called the French and Indian War, in the 1760s. And when the English won that war, they drove a lot of the French people out of eastern Canada, and some of them took refuge in northern Maine, and those were called Acadians. And they came there early on. Then about a generation later, there was a different group of Franco-Americans called Quebecois who came from Quebec to settle the manufacturing cities of
Lewiston.
Yeah, Lewiston, Biddeford, Waterville, Sanford. And they have sometimes had divergences between them. And part of the tension is, you see, that when the Acadians came to Madawaska, Fort Kent, Van Buren, in the valley, they were the first settlers. So the first lawyer, the first judge, the first doctor were all Franco-Americans, and so they laid the foundation for the communities. The Quebecois were coming into a pre-existing Protestant Anglo-Saxon dominated power structure in Lewiston and Auburn, Sanford, Waterville, you take it. And so they had a little bit harder time to become assimilated and gain acceptance and dominance. And so for that reason, sometimes there's some resentment between the Quebecois against the Acadians and otherwise, so Franco-American community. Yeah.
Paul, we're coming close to the end of the show. Will you come back on again?
Sure, of course.
I want to talk about Sumner.
Okay, Charles
Sumner.
Charles Sumner,
And
the abolition.
how the connection to your family, because I just heard this story and nobody knows, but we'll talk about
Okay,
that.
well, sure will.
Paul,
Thanks. All right,
thank
great.
you.
Good,
Great
Tom.
show. It flew
That's
by again. You always do this. It's great. I love it. Thanks for tuning in to Talkin Maine. Paul Mills will come back and join us again and tell us some more history about this state and this country. We'll see you next time. It's phenomenal.